Hi, everyone, and welcome back for another Divorce and Relationships Decoded question of the week. I am one of your hosts, Jennifer Perri. I'm a CDC Certified Divorce Coach, and I am joined by my friend, Dr. Deborah Wilder, who is a divorce and relationship specialist. Hello,
Hi,
my dear. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you, Jennifer?
Good. So, the question of the week is dealing with grief and divorce. So, I know we're going to unpack it a little bit and talk about it, but I wanted to throw it over to you first because we have talked a lot about emotions that we're going to be processing as we go
hmm
through the process. But one of the emotions that I think people deal with that may be surprising is grief. When you are working with somebody who is dealing with the grief of losing that, what does that look like? And what thoughts and advice do you have for them?
So, grief is an interesting process. And I think one of the first things people need to understand, it's not a linear process. It's like a roller coaster. And I'm sure we've all heard that before. But Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is one of I think, the first folks who came up with stages of grief, or at least maybe one of the first folks who wrote about it. And I'll just start with talking about the stages a little bit and then get into the grieving part. So the first stage is usually with grief is usually shock. And then there may be denial. I can't believe this is happening. And then there may be bargaining. Please don't leave me. I'll do whatever you want. And then there's often anger. There's a hurt and anger. And then at some point, there's an acceptance of the reality. So there are these, and there are some in between stages, if you want to call them, but that's the main kind of frame, excuse me, of dealing with grief, whether it's with someone dying or whether it's with divorce, which is the death of a marriage. And the grief could be, or there may not be grief, as you're saying. Much of the time there is, depending on the circumstances, but usually the grief is about something ending that you thought would never end. It's the death of a dream that you had, and that dream no longer exists. Or you might realize that it never existed really in the first place the way you thought it did. And so the ending is the death of a marriage. When we walk down the aisle, and most of us, I think, don't walk down the aisle thinking, well, I wonder how long this is going to last. I think some people might at some point, but usually when we walk down the aisle, we pledge that we're going to be until death do us part. But the death here is the divorce. And so we might be very heartbroken about losing the partner that we had. We might still be in love with that person or still love that person. That makes it even harder when we have those feelings for the ex-spouse. So we're grieving the loss of what we thought would last forever. We're grieving the loss sometimes of the lifestyle that we had. Financially, we've talked about it's very scary if you don't have much, or if you've got a bunch, it's still very scary. And you're grieving the loss of having the family together. I know for me, when I was going through a divorce, one of the things, actually the worst part of it for me is how it affected my children. The worst part of it for me was what this was going to do to my kids. And I was hurt, and it was hard for me. But the worst part and the hardest part is often how this is going to affect the kids. So again, grieving the loss of innocence, grieving the loss of that family unit with two parents and children, whether mom and dad, whatever, you still have two parents and you have that family unit, and now that's broken. And again, I'm not saying that divorce is bad, but it changes everything. So treating it like a death, and we've talked about this before too, that unlike the death of the physical death of somebody is a huge deal. That's like number one. The death of a marriage, I believe, causes the greatest amount of change in the shortest amount of time. So not only are you grieving the loss of so many things, it's a shock to the system. You might grieve the loss of friends who aren't going to be friends with you anymore for whatever reason. You might have to move and lose your community. You might lose extended family. You might be very close and might have been very close to your spouse's family. And then after the divorce, things often change. So there's just a lot of change, and so a lot of grieving. But it's very important to try not to rush it and to remember that it's not linear. You might feel great one day, and then the next morning you feel like you're back at square one, still in shock. I can't believe this is happening. So it's very important as you're going through this process, and it can last a long time. If you've been married for 6 months, excuse me, and you only dated for 2 months before then, your grieving process might not be as long as someone who's been married for 30 plus years. And there's so much to go into that, but it's very important. And I'm sure you tell your clients this, give yourself plenty of grace, plenty of time. Try not to rush it, even though we want to feel better so quickly. But it's a process. It can be a tough process. What do you think?
It is. It can be definitely a tough process, and I agree with you completely. You don't want to ever be rushed or rush yourself or allow other people to rush you through any stage of emotion, especially grief. But at the same time, you don't want to get stuck. And sometimes we'll get stuck in that. And then it's hard for them to go to work, for them to form new relationships, for them to really stay connected to their children, for them to really find their self-worth in what's happening. So I just caution you that if you are watching this and you're feeling stuck, please reach out to us. Definitely reach out to Dr. Wilder, because she specializes in helping people move through this process. What we want to do is make sure that you continue to move forward and that you're able to find yourself in the midst of all of this. And grief can take a hold of people's lives, whether somebody passes away or divorce is the death of a relationship and a dream of what could have been. I would say that divorce is probably the most life-changing transition that you'll ever go through, because it does involve a bunch of things: children, jobs, locations, responsibilities, and that's a lot to process. So make sure that you know that if you are listening, that we are here for you and that we want to help in any way that we possibly can. If there's somebody that is listening to this right now, what is the first step that they can take to move out of the space that they're stuck in?
I think it's very helpful to acknowledge that it's normal to feel these things, and to also understand our bodies are amazing. Our minds are truly amazing. We're built to heal ourselves. Like, we don't have to remind ourselves to breathe. We don't have to remind our blood to flow through our veins. Like, our bodies naturally heal, and our minds can naturally heal as well. So one important thing, even if you can't imagine not feeling the way you feel, you're going to at some point not feel this way. You may still feel that way, but at least on a very lower level at some point. The way that you feel right now is not sustainable forever. And time is amazing. I think we've all heard time can be very healing. So just know that you are going to get through this. It may take you longer, it may take you not as much, but you will get through this and start feeling better. It's going to happen. Your body and your mind work that way to self-heal with time, as well as effort. That helps, but time is a good thing to know.
And if you're watching this and you're saying, oh my gosh, I didn't grieve, there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. I didn't grieve. I think there was a portion of it to when you were talking about children. Like, my first relationship was horrible.
Yeah.
And I had 2 children and their dad was in prison. I think I grieved that my children didn't have a better example.
Yeah.
And there were times that I felt bad. So I grieved it in a little bit of a different way. But if you're listening to this and you haven't experienced that emotion, there's nothing wrong with that. There's no shame in not grieving, whether it was a divorce or separation or the end of a partnership. There's nothing wrong with that. There are a bunch of emotions that I'm sure you did experience that maybe somebody who is grieving didn't.
Yeah.
So just make sure that you're not hard on yourself going, oh my gosh, I don't have emotions. You do. And things hit us all differently. My dad passed away in 99. I don't know if I ever grieved him. And I think it was because there was so much turmoil going on in my life at that period of time that I almost didn't allow myself to process any emotions. Grief can hit you years later. And I've had my own experiences with that as well. But I wanted to just say that if you're listening to this and you didn't feel grief in what happened, there's nothing wrong with you. That's okay.
Yes.
It's fine.
I agree. You don't have to force yourself.
You don't have to force yourself. But again, another great question. And as always, it's always wonderful to have these conversations with you, Dr. Wilder. I like that I know there's somebody who's in my world who is so aligned in how I feel and how I support my clients. So I always like hearing your perspective and your feedback.
Again, I will say it. It goes both ways. I feel the same about you. I know we lift each other up and we share ideas and we share a lot of the same thoughts and feelings. And it's wonderful, the personal relationship that we have, but also the experiences that we're able to not only learn from that we've had, but share in a way that's helpful to other people. I hope whoever is listening or watching to know that healing is possible, feeling better is possible, regardless of how you feel right now. Just know that our bodies and our minds are designed to heal on their own. But likewise, I learn from you always.
Thank you all for tuning in and for finding us. If this is the first time that you found us, welcome. Please make sure that you subscribe, you like, you share, and you also submit your questions to questions@drdakota.com. And hopefully if we get to it, we answer it on the air, or it blossoms into a topic like many of these questions have. So make sure that you stop back and you follow us and you share our information and our segments with those people that you love who may be needing to hear the message that we share. So thank you again, my friend.
Thank
you. We'll be back next week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.